Adventures in Retouching with Rob DiCaterino.
Welcome to Adventures in Retouching. I'm Rob DiCaterino, and today's guest is my friend and fellow retoucher, Jinda Phommavongsa. Welcome.
Hi.
How are you? Where are you, Jinda?
I am in just outside of Boston.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we've been here for about a year.
Excellent. I'm in New Jersey.
Oh, beautiful New Jersey. I miss it.
Yeah. So Northeast. We're in the Northeast. You and I.
It's nice to be back with where like fresh seafood is a commonality in grocery stores.
That's right. Yeah, shrimp, lobster, all that
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
Awesome. So Jinda, let's jump right in. Can you take me through your background?
Yeah. I grew up in Western New York, been a native of New York for most of my life. And in 2001, I had transferred from SUNY Purchase down to the School of Visual Arts in New York City for a couple of different reasons. I wanted to be in the city eventually, and my sister was living there at the time, and I got accepted to photography school. So it just was all in all like on the up. So I was like super happy to be in the city. And just kind of like immersed in photography there. So I finished school in 2005. And then after that, I got an internship slash apprenticeship with a photographer named Mark Joseph Berg, who was really awesome. I got to travel a lot with him, just photo assisting, and eventually became his number one assistant. And really did a lot of work with him, and through him met some other photographers who needed assisting, and from there branched into digital teching, and for a long time that was pretty much most of what I did.
And how about so that's your education background, your training, and then how did you get onto a retouching path?
That was completely accidental. Through my time in school, and even when I was assisting a lot of sort of journalistic style photographers because I wanted to do photojournalism myself. Barely touched Photoshop or computer when I was in school. Not that I looked down upon it or anything like that, but it just wasn't my thing. I didn't want to be a sort of digital photographer. I looked at myself as more of a traditional photographer, making prints, developing, all that stuff. Those was like my main wheelhouse. Eventually, the work that I was doing, which was, a little bit of assisting, a little bit of teching, shooting, started to dry up. The recession hit, and work really like dwindled down for me. And then eventually I sort of just fell into retouching. Someone offered me, one of the photographers that I was photo assisting said, "Hey, I have a bunch of images that need editing, light editing work." So I said, "Okay, yeah, sure. I need to feed myself, so let's do it." And before long, I was doing some pretty heavy retouching for him, and then that rolled into, again, just word of mouth. The guy that I was working for, his name's Justin Barucki. He does like a ton of music photography, portraiture, environmental portraiture, that sort of thing. Just introduced me to some other people, and the work for retouching started to increase, where my work in shooting for myself and assisting and teching just kind of fell to the wayside. So retouching just kind of jumped out and called me.
During your time working with the photographer and going from light retouching to more complex retouching, how did you hone those skills and learn new techniques to be able to do the more complex retouching?
At the time, I was sort of asking a friend of mine who I had graduated with, who later went on to become like a master retoucher himself, Dave Meow, who I think is still the owner of House Retouching. They're based in like Lower Manhattan. He at the time when we were in seniors in college, he was already well knee deep into retouching, and so he was a really useful source. Him and his partner Jeremiah were sort of like my go-tos for questions, and then YouTube came along, and it was sort of just learning on the fly on assisting jobs was sort of like the base of it. Most of the work that I really kind of came into and started to like really steamroll that ball was when I started working at Net-a-Porter. It was sort of like the boot camp for retouchers, as a lot of coworkers and people have passed through that place have called it. It was a really good experience, and it sort of just forced you to like, take it all in all at once.
Can you speak more about that? So about your retouching career and also the boot camp aspect of Net-a-Porter.
Yeah. I mean, my work, I feel like has always been sort of fluid. My career has always been pretty fluid. I thought I was going to be a photographer, ended up becoming a retoucher. Thought I would be a retoucher for a really long time and ended up working and, doing more workflow consulting eventually. But when I was at Net-a-Porter, I had never experienced high volume retouching. And so that was the first big learning curve for me, was getting my speed up to par. And I think having a good background in traditional photography allowed me to sort of just have a really good base to start from. And I've always thought speed can be taught. Speed is one of those things that's really relative to the genre of retouching or the type of retouching you're doing. But the basic skills still need to be there, and that's knowing how far to push something, what to pull back on, that sort of thing. The nice thing about retouching is the industry changes so quickly that you are sort of constantly in catch-up speed and learning new things and hearing about new things, and whether that's learning things through school or YouTube is still again a really great like place to learn things, or just friends. You're looking at friends' photography and saying, hey, like, how'd you do this? Sometimes it's way simpler than you imagined it, and sometimes it's something that's completely mind-blowing that you've never even thought of before.
Can you give an example of one of those changes in the retouching industry?
So one of the last big contract jobs I got was retouching and consulting for Wayfair.com, and they're a big home goods, furniture retailer, online retailer, and just like a lot of the other online home retailers, they are constantly evolving. I think one of the big ones that may be a lot of people don't realize that have again moved from retouching to 3D is IKEA. So the 3D thing was sort of a big wake-up call for me. I think it's slow because there's lots of parts of the photo industry that are still going to have to rely on traditional photography. There's no way of getting around that. But it was really, really great working there for a little bit to see what 3D retouchers, 3D artists can do, hand off to retouchers, and how it just really makes an interior scene just look completely realistic. When you're looking at something on a screen, or even worse yet, your phone, you can't tell. So, my hat's off to those companies that are pushing that envelope.
That's really interesting. I appreciate that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Jinda, what's your setup? Hardware, software, tools?
My setup is pretty minimal, I think. I have just a small Wacom Intuos Pro, a MacBook Pro, I think it's like a 2.4 6-core, a 27-inch 4K monitor. That's pretty much it. For a while, I was running off of iMac, and before that, I was running off of like a G4. But, as again, like technology has gotten smaller and better, it's been nice to be able to work off of a laptop. I'm kind of impressed at how good it is.
You know what I used to love? The old Mac G3 tower. It was that teal and white, and it was like so curvy. It had the handles, and
Uh-huh.
I thought that was so beautiful. So Jinda, can you tell me what is retouching? What does retouching mean to you?
Hmm. Um, to me, it was just another way that I could make my logical brain and my creative brain work in sync with one another. Um, I didn't think, again, like I didn't think I would become a retoucher, but my just my tendencies in working being a little bit more sort of organized on the organized side, all the possibilities to sort of neaten things up in Photoshop are really cool. I loved that. And yeah, it was just something that came along that really surprised me. I didn't understand how powerful it was. And when I realized that, I kind of got sucked into it.
Can you talk about the difference between a good retoucher and maybe someone who isn't a good retoucher? Like what's a good retoucher?
Yeah, I think a good retoucher is a person who, one, has a good comprehension of just photography in general. It seems like most of the good retouchers I know were at one point photographers, or still are, or have sort of that capability to move back and forth. Um, it provides you just with a good base, just with a good foundation. Um, the other thing that I think is really important to be a good retoucher is just have an open mind. We were just talking before about new techniques constantly changing. I think if you're unable to accept new ways to work or accept other ways to get something done, you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot. It could be a way to make something look cleaner. It could make something look amazing without making your file huge. Whatever it is, working faster. Having that open mind to just kind of continually learn is, I think, at the core of it. Like I was saying before, it's like part of what Photoshop is.
How have you evolved as a retoucher, and what has helped you in that evolution?
Mm. Um, Being around people who were like-minded was a big facet to that. I mean, I credit a lot of where I got with the people that I worked with. With old managers that I've had and I've learned from, and just coworkers that like to keep things fun and were also passionate about photography and also passionate about um, trying to support one another. I think was really helpful. I've freelanced at a couple places where, boutique studio, you got your lead retoucher, and it's a very tiered kind of hierarchy, and small groups like that, that I've been to before, I've seen where people don't want to share techniques and they feel really protective about what they're doing. Um, and to me, those are just places that, provided me a paycheck at the end of the day. There weren't places that I felt particularly inspired to be around and be with. And I always sort of gravitated towards um, the sort of team mentality anyways.
Do you ever look back at your old work, and if so, how do you how do you react to seeing your old work?
I do all the time, actually. I was um, one, because I'm always constantly like looking for prints to make for people, which in turn gives me a good opportunity to take something I've learned and apply it to something that I had like I'd done 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago. Uh, like one thing that I was working on was something for my book, and I really liked the image, but I compared to my techniques that I know now, it was a beauty shot, something close up skin. Um, and I really only used like one technique on that. So I went back and um, did a couple, like split frequency and much more detailed dodging and burning. And it came out. It was almost like a completely different photograph when I finished it. And I was happy to do it. Again, like not a whole lot of people saw it, but it was just some way to refresh my portfolio, which was nice.
So of course, in the middle of recording now, there's engines and chainsaws, and that's
funny.
okay.
I can't even hear it on your end.
So I'm going to talk closely to the microphone.
Okay.
What type or what category of retouching is your favorite?
For a while it was skin and beauty. I really liked the transformation of things. And I think, more often than not, today when you're in a studio, someone doing hair and makeup doesn't have the time that they had 20 years ago to do hair and makeup, because they are relying on retouchers to pick up that slack. And I think that's one of the funnest things to do, because you can really see like the big difference. More recently, again, just through working with Wayfair, doing interior compositing is really fun too. You can, with the concepts that art directors are coming up with, juxtapose a 3D in a 2D environment. If there's a wall there and all of a sudden, an art director, creative director doesn't want that there, now they're relying on retouchers to have to like completely fake a wall or composite really different scenes together. And that was a challenge all on its own. It sort of like forces you to take a step back and say, hey, like, what do I remember about, lighting concepts, that I can use to take photo A and help it look better in photo B.
When you were a retouching manager and you had to hire a junior retoucher, someone starting out, getting the foot in the door, what are things on the resume that you're looking for? Like what's something that the person should be focusing on, and maybe things the person doesn't need to focus on, or in their portfolio on the website? What are things that you're going to look for?
If just simple masking things are pretty obvious with a lot of junior retouchings with commercial work. If it's not commercial stuff, is it editorial stuff? Does it look like it sort of has a personal voice? Does it look natural? Does it look overworked? Is it, editorial and like lyrical, or is it editorial and like really candid? I think those are sort of things that I think I like to see, as opposed to someone's online portfolio that's scattered. They have like 2 images of each thing, and there's 1,000 different categories to thumb through. On the other side too, when it comes to actually bringing that person in and speaking with them, the personality is a lot. I'd like to see someone who just has an openness to learn, someone who's open to new ideas and really just like wants to work with other people.
For people who are looking to start out, maybe a recent graduate or someone pivoting and is finding out about retouching and realizes this is an option now, what are the skills that the person should focus on? What are those fundamentals?
I am definitely part of the Wacom pen crew. I think that retouching with the mouse, certainly for some things, is a little easier. But in general, I think if you're retouching with a mouse and like that's your thing, learning how to use a Wacom tablet is, it opens up doors for sure. And blending modes, big one. Learning how to mask. Refine edge in Photoshop has changed a billion times, so keeping up with all the settings for that is a really big thing. And now, if people have on their own, or whether it's learning it through school, have integrated the 3D assets and the 3D plugins in Photoshop is really cool too. I think that would definitely like catch my eye with someone who's coming out of school.
I would add to that layers.
Yeah, that goes without saying, doesn't it? I guess not. Some people probably work in crazy layers.
Yeah.
An ability to not be destructive in your own work.
Yeah, non-destructive. So layers, adjustment layers, like you said, the pen tablet is huge. Even I remember from my own experience when I first, I for a couple of years I was using the mouse, and I thought, wow, I'm really good. And then I saw someone using the tablet. I was like, what is that? Or whatever. And then I bought one because the person really highly recommended it, just like we are. And at first, it felt so wrong and awkward and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I forced myself every day to stick with it. And after a week or two, it was like, and if I went back to try to use the mouse, my hand hurts. I have to use the tablet.
Yeah.
It feels so natural.
Yeah, there's, I mean, it took them a while to do it, to add it to Wacom tablets. I think have you ever used the precision mode on there? I think it's in most Wacoms. I'm not sure if it's just limited to the Wacom Intuos Pros, but it's a button you press and it scales down your workable area to a tiny little section, but doesn't change sort of any of the hover mechanics. So your Wacom pen becomes way less flowy and fast, and focuses it down. So if you're doing really minute movements or brush marks or whatever, I found it really useful is placing things, without having to turn on and off the snapping to grid functions. If you really want something just to move like 1 pixel, sometimes it can be kind of hard with a Wacom, especially if you're on a smaller Wacom, which I am. So being able to press the precision mode basically like allows me to just really move things like in the smallest amounts, which is super helpful.
When I'm making a very small adjustment to a curve.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's like, I moved the curve just that 1%, and then I lift my pen off. And it's like, no, I wanted it. I didn't want it 2%.
That's perfect. Yeah, because a lot of times, your palette is so small, unless you have the luxury of having 2 big monitors. And on on the curves palette, you think, oh, okay, I moved that dot just like 1 section over, but then you look at the numbers and you actually moved it up 10. So it's almost like a weird false sense of security. But precision mode it's a hidden feature. I didn't know what it did. I accidentally came upon it one day and I realized, oh, it's super helpful.
See, that's what this show is all about, is information. And so that's great advice for someone just starting out. How about maybe someone a little bit more advanced, maybe a mid-level? Are there things that come to mind that person, that retoucher, can do to continue to advance and move up?
I think just going out and finding someone's work that you really respect and admire, and reach out to that person and see what they say about working together or collaborating. It's always worked for me. I mean, that first working with Mark Joseph was just sort of an internship at first, and it turned into something really awesome. I've had the luxury of being able to ask retouchers that are much, much better than me about stuff and how to get the help. And, I think now there's probably more opportunities and more places to internship or apprentice. So it's a lot easier to find a place that you can go to and just immerse yourself in an environment that's full of people who are doing like really creative and cool stuff.
Do any techniques come to mind or tools come to mind that are more advanced?
I don't know. I almost feel like once you do something that you think is advanced at first really isn't, because you're doing it so many times. And then oddly enough, when you make everything an actual button that does it for you, you kind of forget how to do it. But like I remember the first time I used like the split frequency thing, actually sort of opened the door for me to start using blending modes more. then I realized, oh, like if you combine them and if you invert them, you get so many more different effects. So, experimenting can be your friend. Happy accidents can be your friend.
Jinda, can you speak to the difference between editorial, advertising, marketing, retouching versus being in an ecom setting?
Ecom, I feel like personally, ecom is one of those places where you will definitely get to showcase your talents to the people around you. I think that the stronger retouchers that you and I have worked with in those settings emerged pretty quickly. And like I said before, like those studios are, they tend to be a lot of people and are good environments to learn from. Whereas opposed to most editorial and boutique places I've been to are a little bit smaller. Sometimes they're harder to get into because they do require such like a high level to get in. But the time is on your side with editorial retouching. Generally, you have a few weeks to work on a handful of images, whereas ecom is really volume based. But again, like both those things can sort of showcase what your strengths are and show you what your weaknesses are and show you what you need to get better at. So I don't think one is any better than the other. I think they're both different beasts, apples and oranges kind of thing.
What are some things that make a retoucher's life more difficult or is frustrating to a retoucher, or blockers versus things that make a retoucher's life easier, or it's just smoother for a retoucher?
It's all about those people around you, whether it's that person who is, it's just one other person sitting next to you. Hi, Rob. Whether it's just, a team of 3 people, if those 2 people on your left and right are hard to work with, it's going to make your day miserable. If they're not pulling their own weight, it's going to make your workload kind of miserable. And yeah, I've been super lucky to be on like really awesome teams where I was surrounded by people who were, be frankly somewhat better than me, and I can actually learn from, and who were willing to teach me, which was nice,
Can you describe the relationship with the other teams in a studio? So if a retoucher has the benefit of working in a studio where all the teams are together, it's all happening at once, can you describe the relationship across the team?
Within a studio, I think those are where the pain points can be. If you're working with a art director or creative director who doesn't understand the limitations and things with Photoshop, that can be frustrating. Can you find, like a happy medium with someone? Hopefully you can most of the time, but sometimes you're trying to tell someone that you can't do it because of time constraints or because it's, mathematically impossible to, add a different plaid shirt on top of something, right? But then again, that's going away because 3D is starting to pick up that area. But with a team, I don't know. There's some sort of like camaraderie that needs to exist between people, and like a shared respect. Whether, like I said, whether it's small team of 4 people or whether it's a big team of like 25 people, I think, generally most people respect each other and understand what their goal is. E-commerce, it's there is a business goal in mind, and understanding your small part in that, big machine. I think there's good points to that. Some people don't like that. They don't feel like they're making a big enough impact, but with an e-commerce image, there's thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who are going to look at that image across, I don't know how many different countries, right? Like a company like Net-a-Porter, they had pretty big viewership, and their clicks definitely show that. On the editorial side, the thing that always sort of bugged me was it felt sort of niche, and I wasn't really sure who the audience was at the time. So
How about the artistic, I have a good eye aspect of retouching versus the more nerdy, technical numbers aspect of retouching?
Yeah, those are definitely two different types of retouchers. One I think is probably going to be a little bit quicker at letting the software do the work for them. Some people that I can think of in the past, were just amazing at making actions and automating things through scripts and such. Whereas, maybe the person with the sort of traditional better eye might take more time at it, and might not see so many different ways to attack a problem. I mean, because that's what every image that we're working on as retouchers are. It's, a set of problems that we're trying to solve.
Do you feel like a successful retoucher has the balance of both the eye and the craft and the technical, nerdy math stuff?
Yeah, eventually. Someone who takes themselves seriously as a retoucher is going to have that skill set eventually. I think that's like one of those things. It's like a learning curve, and you have to just be willing to accept those areas if you want to get better. Just being too one-dimensional isn't a good way to work in anything.
How do you feel about over-retouching? Is there such a thing as dangerous retouching? And in your opinion, in your experience, what is the line between good retouching and over-retouching or dangerous retouching?
Yeah. Well, dangerous retouching is definitely not, backing up your work, saving revisions, working in a way that's non-destructive. That's one thing that I take precedent like very highly. I'm always, backing up and doing versions of my work, because frankly, if software is unstable, you never know what's going to happen, right? Like that's pretty straightforward. On the sort of don't be destructive, don't mess up your work kind of thing.
What is the line between good retouching and over-retouching?
Again, I think that's also one of those things that's based in what it is. If you're working for an ecom retailer retouching and you're spending an hour on one image, you're probably overworking it, or overthinking something that's making you take too long. And it is sort of a taste-based thing. Hopefully the manager or the QA director or the art director, whoever's, helping you go through this has a good eye and can understand where something also is starting to come to that edge. Things can get overworked all the time. Like you get carried away with learning a new technique and then you use it too much and then you realize that you've overdone something. I remember the first time I discovered sort of was it the liquid brush tool or the blending brush tool. I was like, oh, like I don't have to clone anymore and I can just, use this thing. We are all guilty of overworking something, and we need a second eye, a second opinion to sort of reel us back.
Jinda, any good memories that come to mind, or funny memories, funny stories from retouching or from working in a studio?
So funny things. I mean, that's like my core, as putting pictures of cats on people's heads and, just it's so easy to get caught up in like the serious business side of retouching, but you got to be able to laugh and have fun with it. I think once you once you stop having fun with retouching, that just becomes, you have a horrible job. The biggest takeaway from, those days when we were at Net-a-Porter was, joking around saying, no pit is worth a life, because, at the end of the day, like, everyone wants to go home and have drinks and be able to relax and and not take work too seriously. There's times when we always had to, batten down the hatches, and everyone has deadlines and everyone has to meet them. But try and remember that this is fun. It's supposed to be fun.
Jinda, what do you see for your own future? Do you stay in retouching? Do you pivot? If so, what ideas do you have for your own future?
I still retouch every now and again, just enough to keep my skills up to par, and just sort of keep me engaged in the trenches part of retouching. But in general, I've becoming a manager and working for some bigger companies. I've moved into the digital asset management side of things and the workflow side of things, and that speaks to me because I've had my core and my base knowledge be in traditional photography and photo assisting. And the one thing I've learned after being in all these different places is so many companies have so many different ways of working, and that even the big companies, just like individuals, they can become one-dimensional, and they start working with horse blinders on and don't want to change things, either because one, they're afraid, or two, they've monetarily invested in something that isn't working, and they just have to see a contract through. I think of myself as someone who can branch those two different worlds and speak to people who are tech oriented and people who are solely just there to make the image, the creatives. That happy medium and that being that translator really fit for my skill set, and it's something that I hope to continue to do.
I hope that when I'm speaking right now that the microphone is picking it up okay, because it sounds like there's an entire airport of jets outside. I don't know what's going on out there, but
I can't hear it.
So last question, is there anything else that you would like to add? Any final thoughts? Anything that I forgot to cover?
I think we covered a lot. And we kept saying it, but if you're not having fun with it, then it's not worth it. It's that simple. Everything that we do in life, if you're not having fun at it, you're not enjoying it, it just becomes monotonous, and that can be a real drag because Photoshop has so much potential. Photography has so much potential for creativity, for new roads, to go down. So I think that's sort of just my final thought. Have fun.
Well, Jinda, thank you so much for being my guest today on Adventures in Retouching.
Yeah, this was fun. I'm so glad I got to speak.
I'm Rob DiCaterino. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. Leave comments, like, subscribe. It's YouTube. You know what to do. But if you have any comments, questions about what we spoke about, if you have any tips or advice, or if you need to ask me any questions, ask. Be bold.
Be bold. Be brave.
I'm here to help. Jinda, where can people find you online?
They can find me at photovongsa.com.
I'm Rob DiCaterino. Thanks for watching Adventures in Retouching. See you soon.